coming up on This Week in Startups.
There's been so much of this sort of self-aggrandizement that, and I feel kind of sad even saying that I'm almost jaded by those kinds of emails now. When somebody's like, oh, I've sold my last company for $30 million. I'm starting a new one now. Please take a look. To me, instantly, I go to the place of, well, why hasn't anyone else taken a look? Which is definitely not the right way to think about it.
This Week in Startups is brought to you by
Masterworks, the first company allowing investors exposure into the blue chip artwork asset class. Twist listeners can skip the 30,000 person waitlist by going to masterworks.io and using promo code TWIST.
LinkedIn Marketing. To redeem a $100 LinkedIn ad credit and launch your first campaign, go to linkedin.com/thisweekinstartups. And Dataiku. AI-driven growth is not just about technology, it's about organizational transformation. Join more than 45,000 people worldwide who are driving results with Dataiku. Visit dataiku.com.
All right, on the program, the second ever guest who will remain anonymous. This is the second time we've ever done it in the history of the program. We normally don't like to have anonymous guests. We want people to own their words. The first time was Bitfinex, which is a very cool Twitter handle that has been covering shenanigans at Tether. I'm being charitable. Shenanigans would be the word I'd use. If I'm not being charitable, I would say fraud, fines, and sanctions, which have occurred around the globe for that firm. And you probably, if you're in the capital allocation community, are well aware of a very funny account on Instagram. And that account is called Prayingforexits. It also has a Twitter handle as Mr. Exits, but I don't actually consume it there. I consume it on Instagram. The account makes fun of, communicates with, and otherwise dunks on and has fun with capital allocators and VCs and the folly of what we do for a living. We are going to disguise the voice of Mr. Exits, who, as best as we can tell, worked for, some sort of average, prototypical VC firm. We, as a disclaimer here, do not know. This person could work for me. This person could not be in the industry. We have no idea. So, disclaimer. The account's hysterical, and I thought interviewing an anonymous account would be funny. So, welcome to This Week in Startups, Mr. Exits.
Thank you for a really wonderful introduction, and excited to talk to you. It's been a long time coming.
May I call you Praying?
You can call me whatever makes you happy, Jason.
So I will call you, I'm going to call you Mr. Exits because it's funnier. So how long have you been doing this Twitter handle? And what was your inspiration for doing it?
Well, I've been doing it for about 3 years now. And as far as my inspiration, maybe I could ask you a question that your audience might not know about and could help us sort of contextualize this a little bit more.
Sure, why not?
And maybe you could talk a little bit about Cyber Surfer's Silicon Alley.
So when I was in New York, my first job as a writer was writing for Paper Magazine. I had a magazine called Cyber Surfer. My online handle was Cyber Surfer. I had, when you first got onto online services in the 80s, you picked the handle. The handle was not your name. And so I was the Cyber Surfer, which was based on the Marvel character Silver Surfer. And then I did, we had this term Silicon Alley, referred to New York, and I did silly, as in like it's silly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my first little column, my first writing byline, in fact, in Paper Magazine.
Yeah. So
1994, maybe.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Paper Magazine, maybe not since back then, but more recently, just culturally. And I saw that you had sort of like a semi-pseudonymous sort of thing that you did there. And just, I think that, probably a lot of the same things that you saw when you decided that was a good idea was probably a lot of the same inspirations that kind of led me to where I am. The original impetus for the account was never for it to be anything larger than more of a journal for myself to really highlight things that I felt were sort of incongruent between what was widely available via the media and what I was experiencing myself as a venture capitalist allocating capital in kind of that environment. And so really what the impetus was just providing a more realistic view of what I thought that I was seeing. And I didn't necessarily need or care to have an audience, which is why it's been private this whole time. This never really was for any sort of like notoriety. I think it really was just, considering like a cyber surfer as well, it was just to really provide commentary in the most accurate way I thought possible about an industry that I don't think necessarily has too many outlets that are, providing a more just black and white commentary, I'd say.
And what has the reaction been? I saw it, and like VC Brags and other Goldman Sachs Elevator, other, accounts that poke fun at our industry. I thought it was hilarious. And people sometimes don't have a sense of humor. So I'm curious, what has the reaction been to the gentle ribbing and or dunking or commentary been writ large? Any notable people upset and or blocking you? Mark Andreessen.
Mark has not blocked me, but I've heard he's had some commentary on some specific things, which is totally fine with me. I don't think that I've gotten a very negative response overall, just because I try to keep things as honest as possible and try to keep my opinion out of things as much as possible. So I really try not to sit there and say, hey, I think this specific founder or company, is not credible if I don't have any real experience that tells me otherwise. I think what I try to do is I try to pull threads in VC land where, I think that everybody would agree that it's either a problem or it's either something funny to contextualize it with. But maybe because they're not anonymous or because they have a lot riding on sort of the credibility surrounding their persona that they've created, they're less inclined to be honest about these kinds of things. I really, really don't have any interest in just being like, I think one of the things, and this is no hate on VC Brags or anybody else, but I think it's a very low form of humor just to like put people down because you disagree with them or whatever it might be. I think what's a lot more interesting and what I really try to focus on is like, there should be a level of truth telling that matches the level of kind of like, building up your own brand that exists in this space. And I really just want to create sort of a more even playing field between those two states of being.
And it really is incredible how just 20 years ago, when I was still a journalist, journalists weren't really brands. You'd have a Walt Mossberg once in a while, but generally journalists weren't brands. And founders once in a while became brands. Steve Jobs, notably Bill Gates, but not too often. And VCs were not brands at all. In fact, they shunned the limelight. They generally didn't do press. And just in the last 15 years, social media, blogging, and podcasting has led to this playbook, which arguably, I was one of the pioneers in, Fred Wilson was, of, just talking about what we do as capital allocators and before that as entrepreneurs. But now it's kind of jumped the shark in a way where new VCs, and I'm interested in your take on this, feel like job number one is to build their personal brand.
Sure.
And somewhere down the list, after building their blog and their Medium and their avatar and their podcast, is investing in great companies and growing them. It seems like they've almost got it backwards. Maybe you could comment a little bit on the insanity of the celebrity investor.
Yeah, I think I have like two sort of comments to it. One is something that somebody told me very early on in my life and something that's stuck with me and which is the way I've decided to approach my career, which is that, like the manager is never the artist in the sense that in the music industry, if you are managing Madonna or Bono or somebody like that, you are not them just because you are enabling them and allowing them to succeed in some way, shape or form through your work. That doesn't mean that you are them. And I think that we've created this kind of like flywheel that has these very negative implications in the sense that there are so many new funds that have popped up that there is not, without sort of like, especially if you're a newer capital allocator, you don't really have much to go on as far as track record or sort of any level, unless you're coming from, that industry, coming from the industry before. There's not a lot of different ways to differentiate yourself for LP dollars besides sort of like this level of self-aggrandizement that I think that everybody feeds into. And I think that once one person sort of starts that, it becomes an avalanche where, if you're competing for Harvard endowment dollars, you better have a damn good story why you think you're qualified to do it, especially if you've never invested before. And
it's
so,
a bit of an arms race,
it's an arms race for people to build their egos up. And
right.
I think that, in a lot of ways, the LPs are kind of not necessarily forcing it to happen, but have created an environment where, because new managers are getting dollars, all of these new managers have to find a way to compete with each other outside of what was sort of necessitated by fund managers in the 90s and early 2000s, even the early 2010s. And so I think I'm not a fan of it necessarily. I think that it might be a necessary evil in this current epoch, but I don't know if it's something that is sustainable or good for the ecosystem over the long term.
Listen, I'm not an art guy. I don't know anything about art, but I do know where to go to appreciate a masterpiece. My investment portfolio, that's right. I recently allocated a little bit of my cheddar to a piece by Brooklyn's own Basquiat. I always loved Basquiat growing up. I just thought he had a really great style. I can't afford a Basquiat. I mean, maybe I could, but it would be a big purchase. And so I went to Masterworks and I just put a little money towards that. And while people are going crazy over those NFTs, many savvy investors have been allocating capital into the art market. In fact, art as an asset class has outpaced the S&P by 174% from 1995 to 2020, according to Masterworks. But fine art has always been way more exclusive than other alternative investment categories until now. With Masterworks, you can own shares in a multi-million-dollar painting just like I did, and you don't need to be super rich. How? Masterworks securitizes investment-grade contemporary pieces by artists like Warhol, Banksy, Basquiat, and even Picasso. I had the Masterworks CEO and founder Scott Lynn on the program. He was awesome. You can check out episode 1087 and 1232. Really smart cat. Love his company. Love his vision. Very much like I invest in startups, he invests in art. He's an expert in art. I'm an expert in startups. So I have now been allocating a little bit of capital to my art portfolio on Masterworks. Twist listeners can skip the waitlist and get exclusive access by heading to masterworks.io/twist to get started. Once again, that's masterworks.io/twist. See important disclaimers at masterworks.io/disclaimer. Yeah, I think when you look at it, there were, in the early days, a cohort of people. I was a journalist. Malik was a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And we became capital allocators. So we just didn't stop writing because we love to write. So we blogged.
Mm-hmm.
Fred Wilson in New York had invested in Tumblr and was investing in RSS companies, Technorati, etc., blogger with Ev Williams, and I believe. And he just wanted to use the software, so he started writing a little bit. So there was kind of the three of us writing, and Dave Weiner, of course, creator of RSS and OPML, was writing about technology. So it was just a way for us, before social media became the place to do this, to just sort of share ideas, what were going on in our world, and create conversations. It was really about having a conversation more than deal flow, building a brand. It was more for the conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something changed along the way. Because Brad Feld and then Jerry Colonna, Fred Wilson's partner, and then Mark Suster all started blogging. We were all kind of in the same circles. And it was just a fun way for us to share information. And the great part about it was, when I came into the industry in the 90s, you wouldn't be able to get a term sheet from another founder because they didn't want to share it because they were scared they were going to get sued.
Right.
And so the idea of how to pitch something or how a term sheet worked or what these deal documents meant, none of that was available online. It was all a black box. It was all opaque. And what these early blogs did was Brad Feld explained to people, how to read a term sheet, or Mark Suster explained, how to, get meetings, whatever it was. It was very how-to-y and just trying to support entrepreneurs. And then everybody saw, wow, their deal flow is increasing. Their speaking gigs are increasing.
Sure.
And that created the arms race to now where people have taken a correlation and attributed causation to it, right?
Agreed.
And that is, I think, dangerous. And I think I would be, in some ways, more successful as an investor if I spent less time podcasting. If I took, instead of doing 6 podcasts a week, if I did just 2 and I put those other, 5 or 6 hours into meeting with founders, I think I would be more successful.
Yes.
And so even I look at it and go, oh my God, the infrastructure that this takes, 7, 8 people work on this podcast, and I don't know what Mark and Andreessen and like their crazy media thing that they kind of, built up over there, and nobody really reads it. It's not very good, but they feel like they have to replace the media for some reason. It's kind of strange. And I do think it's having a weird impact on this next generation that they don't seem to want to do the work that Bill Gurley did or Michael Moritz did or Roelof did. When I looked at those folks as, mentors of mine, and I would ask them questions, it was about picking up the phone on the weekend for a founder or, being willing to go to the founder's office and spend time with the team and give them advice and hear what their plans were, or, interview a CTO for them and convince the CTO of why you put this $3 million in and why that equity might be worth something, and try to close a couple of deals. And now it's, TikToks. And we're kind of getting to the point of craziness. Like, does the world need the 15th version of This Week in Startups or the 25th version of, or the 250th version of Fred Wilson's blog? I don't know that we do need that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if we need that either. And I think that the weird part that we have to kind of work through is the fact that our industry has now become a point of interest for a large swath of people that might not necessarily have even been interested in technology by and large 10, 20 years ago.
Interesting point.
Yeah.
Why is that important?
Well, so I'm actually going to quote you. I'm going to read a quote back to you from Jason Calacanis, Wired, 1999. The internet is more about the kid from Brooklyn than the kid from MIT. Do you remember saying that?
I do.
Yes.
And that's a pretty fucking great quote, because it is true.
I think it's very, very poignant in the sense that, yes, we realistically don't need another Fred Wilson, because there only will be one Fred Wilson. And the things that Fred Wilson can write about and the context that he can provide is very, very specific. But my argument and my devil's advocacy here would be, is there's only a certain amount of people that can really understand what Fred Wilson is writing in the way that he intends it to be written. I'm sure there's a lot of people that can understand 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of it. But to really understand all of the context needed to garner the true insights of what Fred is saying, you have to be exposed to a lot. And I think the opportunity that is being created is all of these different siloed places of exposure. Whereas, you were a group of 5 people who were providing this exposure back in the day. Yeah. People didn't really have the optionality to go and say, hey, Jason is a little bit maybe ahead of the curve for what I'm trying to understand about the industry. Perhaps there's somebody else that can posit it in a different way that is a little bit more approachable and acceptable. Sure. And I would say, while it may dilute the content being put out by the people that are really pushing the edge and pushing the envelope, it also is kind of necessitated by the fact that there are so many people interested in what we're doing right now. There's no way all of them, those people's interests can be continued by reading people like Fred Wilson or Thomas Tungus or whoever it might be. There has to be some level of intermediacy between kind of that high level and just no exposure at all.
When you look at the industry today, we're obviously at, a bull run. I wouldn't say the end of the bull run. It's impossible to predict. But it's been a hell of a bull run. I don't know how old you are. I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but...
sub 30.
Okay. So you're sub 30. Perfect. Thank you. So having lived through the other ones, and you're probably, apparently, based on Cyber Surfer, Silicon Valley Paper Magazine, the Wired quotes, you are a student of history. We're at a pretty toppy top of a top right now. And behavior, in my experience, and the participants in the ecosystem, as it tops, becomes very strange and weird. In other words, when the market was on the floor in 2009, 2010, there's like a new company being launched every other week, every week. You could kind of keep up with it. There just wasn't as much craziness in town. And same thing for 2002 to 2005, Delicious, Weblog Zing, Blogger. There was a very small cohort of companies. And then when it peaks, 2008, it was getting pretty bubbly. And then now, obviously, super bubbly in 1999, 2000. What are you seeing in terms of the entitlement of either the venture class, the entrepreneur class? You've done these sort of Q&As or story times on the handle. and you get a lot of crazy stories. So maybe you could tell the audience what's the entitlement level out there on a scale of 1 to Elizabeth Holmes.
I think we're reaching Theranos levels of entitlement for sure. And I think it's probably important here to define what I mean by entitlement. I don't think it's necessarily the entitlement of like, oh, I went to Stanford and now you owe me $100 million post-money valuation because I have AI in my deck. I don't think that that's necessarily the level of entitlement. But what I do think is the level of entitlement is that, I think that people believe that if they check specific boxes that are outside of educational, but even more so, just like, I'll give you an example. Obviously, we're in a very, very interesting time for cryptocurrency right now.
Strange.
And, I think that if you were to even provide the semblance of some sort of structure around some type of DAO, I think that you would be able to raise a fair amount of money if you had some credibility behind it. And I think that the entitlement comes from people expecting that them participating in a specific vertical or a specific area of technology immediately garners them a specific multiple, immediately garners them a specific level of interest from specific firms, et cetera, et cetera. I think that every, popular consumer company in the world probably feels somewhat entitled that Andreessen Horowitz should be back knocking down their door any day, given their metrics. I think that, I think that there's this kind of, I think it comes from both founders. I think venture capitalists are equally as guilty of this too, because there's a lot of entitlement of like, oh, I'm sure this founder will come talk to me any day now because it seems like he's about at that point, right? And so I think that, like, to your point, I think that a lot of what we do as venture capitalists has gone from, being extremely proactive, where I'll take calls on the weekend. I'll, go into the office and do a product session with people at 9:30 p.m. I think it's gone from that to, okay, we've established our brand. We'll just let people come to us now. And I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't personally think it's a very good thing. I think sort of proactivity is always the way that you get better results as opposed to
You're 100% right. Right now, LinkedIn is going to give you $100 credit towards your first ad campaign. I kid you not. All you have to do is go to linkedin.com/thisweekinstartups and you'll get the hundy. No spaces, no dashes. You need high quality leads. We know that. Everybody needs those high quality leads. And you're going to launch your new campaign, right? You've been through this before. You know your audience, your team is so excited, and everything is going perfectly according to plan, except you got that one thought in the back of your head. How can I be sure my acquisition campaign will drive high impact leads for the sales team? And they're going to let you know if those are not the good leads. So with LinkedIn ads, you don't need to guess, because when you advertise on LinkedIn, your messages reach people who are ready to engage. LinkedIn equals business, business equals LinkedIn. It is that simple. And with 30 million companies now engaging on LinkedIn and over 71% of professionals using LinkedIn to inform their business decisions, LinkedIn is going to give you that growth you need to take your startup or your big business to the next level. So the call to action. You know it. Don't wait to start achieving your brand and lead gen goals. Get $100 in ad credits for your first LinkedIn campaign right now at linkedin.com/thisweekinstartups. Once again, linkedin.com/thisweekinstartups. Terms and conditions apply because they're giving you a hundy. You know the facts. Go get it. The one thing I've had in my career is I never expected to be here. And I kind of pinch myself, like Sequoia picked me to be the first scout. Naval picked me to be the first AngelList syndicate. I hit 2 unicorns in my first 5 at Sequoia. I hit 2 unicorns in my first 10 on AngelList. Oh my God, what a time to be alive, right? Like, I hit it perfectly. I started angel investing the year after the market corrected. So
it's a good one.
It was a pretty good time to go, it would be like showing up in California the week before the gold rush, and having already bought your house and had a bunch of pickaxes. I had everything set up already. I just bought a farm and everybody's like, oh, by the way, there's gold under the farm. So I'm like, really? I just bought a 500-acre farm. Okay, great. I guess I'll start mining. And, because I never went to MIT, which in my younger years, what you heard in that Wired quote was a little bit of the chip on my shoulder. I just thought to myself, well, I'm going to beat the MIT kids by hustling harder because they're smarter than me and they know some things that they taught in those courses that I just don't have access to because there was no such thing as like MIT OpenCourseWare or any of this amazing stuff, which is free on YouTube now that anybody can watch from around the world, and they have like 1 million views. And Mr. Beast has 100 million, on his Squid Games. I love Mr. Beast, but the love of God, you can take an AI or algorithm or economics, macro, microeconomics course from MIT for free right now, and it's got 600,000 views. And I've been taking it while watching them. I've been watching them at night, and I'm just like, what is going on here? This has 600,000 views. You have 600 million. Putting that aside, the thing that made me, do well in the early part of my career was that I just made myself super available, and I hosted events and I emailed people cold. I emailed Raul at Reportive, and I just emailed info@reportive.com and said, this is a really cool toolbar. Have you ever thought about taking money? And he wrote me back and he was like, oh, Jason Calacanis, I know you. I listened to your podcast. I was like, which episode? Because there were 4 episodes or something at that point. And he was like, yeah, we'll take your $50,000. And then that's how I became one of the first investors in Superhuman, was because he was like, yeah, I'm going to do another thing. I was like, great. And that wound up being a major bagger for me. And it's that like humility that I don't see. And I agree with you that the level of entitlement amongst new venture capitalists and even some of these, quote unquote brand names is like, I don't need to put my email address out there. Or the one I love is when you see this, like the guy from Lightspeed who just, Jeremy Liu, like went on this tirade on Twitter about like how to contact him. And I dunked on him, and it was before like you existed or VC Brags existed. So it's just like, do me a favor. You can email me anytime, Jason at Calacanis. Don't email this dipshit if he's like upset at how you're emailing him or what the subject line is or how long it is. Like, great. Like every VC has that moment where they like, stop emailing me. Get off my lawn. You should contact me through one of my portfolio companies. It's like, well, what is this? The riddle of the Sphinx? Like, you have to get past Medusa or the Minotaur to get the golden fleece. Like, you have an email address. Let them open your email. It's your job. Is it so hard to open your email and look at the first 3 slides of the deck and see if it's a fit? Yeah. It's infuriating.
So I think one of my theses, and, you being a poker player as well, I'm sure you'll appreciate, is that ego is minus EV. What I mean by that is that, the amount of opportunities that you miss simply by sort of purporting yourself to be more important than you are will constantly get you this negative feedback loop. And I think that like one of the great things about when I started in VC that I really, really miss was kind of that, I think like hustle mentality has kind of been perverted in this modern day era, because it's like hustle mentality to, the kids these days is like, all right, let's see how many people we can get to follow us on Twitter. And let's see how many people we can get to join our Discord. And then let's see how many people like we can, there's all of these sort of fake bastions of progress that people sort of tie themselves to. And I think what I really miss about old Silicon Valley, and this sounds ridiculous to someone to say who's sort of been in it for about 10 years, but like, I think the aspect of, you being willing to put your ego to the side and say, hey, I'm going to cold email this founder and literally be like, hey, I'm looking to be helpful. And I think that your product is great. And I also think I have some money for you because I believe your product is so great. Yeah. That is something that if you are, if you're a 10-year partner at Sequoia, your ego really probably won't allow you to do anymore, just because it is kind of incongruent with the rest of the partner level at all of these other funds, right? Like that just doesn't happen. And so you kind of get sucked into this sort of whirlpool of like keeping up with the Joneses in a negative way. Yeah. And I think that like I really hope we can get back to the place where like VCs and VCs felt like that they were on the same plane as founders and not for some reason elevated for whatever reason. And the level of sort of like, to your point, entitlement, ego, all of these things, like it just sort of perverts this whole industry. And kind of bring it back to why we're even sitting here, that really feeds into a lot of what the page is about. It's kind of like tempering people's egos in a lot of ways. Hopefully,
it's a backstop. Yeah, it's like behave yourself out there, because you could wind up on Prayingforexits if you show up an hour late for the meeting and you're on your phone the whole time. Like,
right? I don't mean it to be that where it's like I don't want it to be like this reaper of like cancel culture where if you up, then I'm going to come. But I also want it to be like, hey, this is a place where I'm going to be 100% honest. I'm not in anybody's pocket. I have my own thing. I don't need anybody else's money. I don't take advertisements. I don't take any of this stuff. Like, I really just only do it to be as honest as I feel like I can be. And so, I think that this sort of like preoccupation with how important we all are is just so stupid. And hopefully we can get back to building cool stuff, because
I will tell you, as somebody who was invested in by Sequoia and being a scout there, I was always impressed by, given their success as the number one firm historically, the lack of ego, because I would come there as a young entrepreneur and it would be like, there's Staglione, there's Michael Moritz, there's these two young guys, Alfred Lin and, Ruloff, sitting in on meetings with them.
Sure.
And they were there every day. And when I emailed Michael Moritz that I had this new idea for a company, he responded to my email in under 15 minutes and called both of my phone numbers, back in the day of phone numbers, within the hour, and said, when can you meet? I'm at my office today and tomorrow. Is there any times that work? And I was like, that's why he's Michael Moritz. Like, and I wrote the shortest email. I was like, hey, I'm Jason Calacanis. I sold my last company to AOL for $30 million, 18 months after starting it. I'm starting my next company. It's in the search space. Boom. He just...
Great email, by the way.
Yeah, I knew how to put it on the hook. I was like, and they funded me like immediately.
For sure. But I think that the problem that we kind of have talked about with founders probably prevents a lot of partners from also sort of interacting in that way. And what I mean by that is, like, take yourself, for instance. If somebody were to say that exact email to you, and to be perfectly clear, I think that Sequoia is one of the best people of like no ego. They are willing to look at everything. And they like, I really want to like reinforce that I have nothing against them as far as that.
That's
but I think that there's been so much of this sort of self-aggrandizement that, and I feel kind of sad even saying that I'm almost jaded by those kinds of emails now. When somebody's like, oh, I've sold my last company for $30 million. I'm starting a new one now. Please take a look. To me, instantly, I go to the place of, well, why hasn't anyone else taken a look? Which is definitely not the right way to think about it. Yeah. But it is kind of the way that we are conditioned to think about in this kind of weird sort of preoccupied behind brand and logo and all this phase of the industry we're in. And so
I think going for, I think that at that point in time, that was a good email. I would agree with you at this point in this time, because everybody's a genius right now.
Right.
Because everything's up and to the right. I used to make a joke and, put the number of unicorns I had. And then it's just like, well, then somebody said to me, oh, I have more unicorns than you. And I said, oh, really? Congratulations. Which ones? And he started telling me the unicorns. I was like, you were in that round? I was in that round. I know. He goes, no, I bought shares on Second Market when it was already a unicorn. And I just put it on my AngelList profile.
Yeah.
I was like, oh. So now,
Yeah, there's a lot. And so like, even your email, like I would say, like, you telling sort of Doug or Michael Moritz, hey, I just sold a company for $30 million. Like, me in this context today, what I would think about is like, oh, he only got $30 million for it. I wonder how much money he lost to sell it for $30 million.
Yeah.
So
the reason I wrote it that way, I'll tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking, if I was in his shoes and he did Google and it got past $1 billion, I would think this kid hit a double. Maybe on his next one, he's hungry enough to hit a trip, to hit a home run. So I was kind of I had like 3 or 4 different versions of it. And then, I now, in terms of talking about stuff, just, I tell everybody the chart. Like, if you just send an email about your customers and how they use your product and the engagement, the growth of that, and how many of those customers there are, you will just change yourself, because everything now is like some buzzwords,
of course,
or some soft metrics, and it's like, I love a charming email that's like, we just hit our 7th customer and they've got 10 seats of our SaaS product. And, here's a chart of the number of minutes they're spending in it. Like, that's the perfect email. I train everybody in our accelerator at the early stage, own these modest wins, these tiny moments of engagement, because those are so real. Those are like, you're on the second date with the woman who eventually, or eventual husband or wife, and you just have this amazing date, and then you go for a magical walk around Central Park, whatever it is. And, it's just like that early romantic moment of a startup when you get that first big client and they ask you if you have pricing for 25 seats,
Right. Right.
And do you have a group plan? And you're like, no, we never thought about that. We don't have multiplayer mode in our product, but we'll add it. The potential for positive change with AI is huge, but seeing that value is hard. AI-driven growth is about organizational transformation, not just technology. And many businesses struggle with bringing AI initiatives to fruition. That's where Dataiku comes in. Dataiku is the platform for everyday AI, systemizing the use of data for exceptional business results. At its core, Dataiku allows companies to leverage one central solution to design, deploy, and manage AI and analytics applications. And it's accessible for everyone, whether technical or if you're on the business side. Dataiku also facilitates using pre-built components and automation wherever possible to streamline work processes as well as consistent management and governance across teams and projects to create transparent, repeatable, and scalable AI and analytics programs. Visit Dataiku to learn more. That's DATAIKU.com to learn more. Let me ask you this.
Can we just build on that for one second?
Sure. No.
Are you putting right now more emphasis on sort of qualitative aspects around team, founder, the integrity of those, that kind of thing? Or are you putting more around sort of the qualitative, these are our retention metrics, this is our CAC, this is how we're doing? Like, where do you find yourself putting more of the emphasis on how you're evaluating? And then I'll give you my answer and see if we're on the same page.
So I believe that at the end of the day, the flywheel for startups is the team building a great product that eventually hits, customers, and those customers engage in it, love it, etc., which then makes you money or gets you more investment, which then lets you hire bar-raising people or more people to make a better product. And if you can stay in that flywheel as a founder and not get distracted by NFT Basel and some bullshit DAO and being in the Forbes 30 under 30, 40 under 40, 50 over 50, whatever bullshit. And you can just say, can I get another great team member today?
Yep.
Can we make the product 5% better this week? Can we find another customer today? Or can we save a customer from churning, whatever it is? The people who have that level of focus and obsession, the flywheel starts, and it really is a contest of who can stay the most focused and least distracted. And if you looked at somebody like Travis at Uber, or Vlad at Robinhood, or Elon at Tesla, any of the great entrepreneurs, Zuckerberg would be the best example. I mean, that guy is like so obsessed of just the product and the growth of that, and Jeff, iterating on it. Jeff at Bezos. It really is very simple. Now, the thing that I see trips people up who are investors is they look at the long list, and Bill Gurley's the one who taught me this, which was, Jake, how a lot of people look at the list of things that could go wrong and they don't invest. And we have an expression inside a benchmark, what could go right? That's my ridiculous Bill Gurley. That's my ridiculous Bill Gurley. Now we do at the poker game, and now everybody at the poker game does it slower and slower.
I love it. More draw.
More, just like we to the point of absurdity, as if like you slowed a record down to, 10% speed. But his point is very correct. The idea that you would dunk on a startup because they failed, it's like, 80% fail. Like you get no credit for passing. Like, oh, you passed? You passed when 80%. Yeah. That's like saying like, I didn't bet the number 32 on the roulette wheel. I'm a genius. It's like,
totally. Yeah.
Like, duh. There's 40 numbers. Like, of course I bet black, and then let's have a conversation, it's not how this works, dummy. And so I think where people get tripped up in the metrics game is, I introduced people to Calm, Uber, Wealthfront. In some cases, they looked at the churn or they looked at the product and they saw all these problems and they didn't give enough credit to the founder for having solved the first 3 or 4.
Right.
And they were looking at the next 20.
Totally.
And I always look at the next 20 and I look at the 3 or 4 and I'm like, if they got those 3 or 4 done and they can get one of these 20 done each quarter for 20 quarters in 5 years, we're going to have this most incredible business ever.
Sure.
So when they were like, oh my God, you can't, Uber can't be in Vegas, they stopped it. Or, oh my God, are they part-time? Are they full-time? Who's paying their benefits? I was like, those things are all solvable.
Yeah, exactly.
It may not be solvable in every city. Like Vegas was the last city to fall,
Right.
The day I went to Vegas and was able to get an Uber, I literally got choked up because I was like, I knew how hard it was
to get in. Yeah.
Like every CES, everybody was texting Travis, why aren't you in Vegas? Why aren't you in Vegas? This sucks. And so I do think the ability to look at the team and just say, it's all going to work out. If they figured out the first 3 or 4 things, they got 2 or 3 people who are really talented to come on the adventure, 2 or 3 customers. That's what I look for. And that's why I've stayed early stage. It's better than being late stage because late stage, there's no romance.
You're forced to look at the metrics.
You just look at the metrics and you're like, oh, well, they're having a retention problem. And it's like, if they got to 10 million, even in those cases, they got to 10 or 20 million in revenue, you don't think they're going to solve that problem?
Sure.
Like there's a pivot in there. There's an iteration in there. There's a hire in there. So anyway, what's your thesis at this point?
Yeah, my personal opinion is that integrity is one of the most sort of underappreciated metrics in evaluating early stage startups. And I think that it's also one of the metrics that has the most latent value if you can understand how accurately to underwrite what a person with high integrity is capable of. And what I mean by that is that, everybody is sort of benchmarking their understanding of valuation on the same things, right? If you have 20 firms and everybody's looking at the same customer acquisition costs and the same 3-month churn and the same, all of the metrics that you're looking from the same data room are the exact same, then you are likely going to come to the exact same conclusion as everybody else. And that doesn't really give you the opportunity to really do what venture capitalists are supposed to do and get those 100Xs, those 1000Xs, and really make big swings. I think if you're underwriting things the same way as everybody else, you're leaving this massive sort of qualitative moat of these businesses that you're not really evaluating because you're so preoccupied by the quantitative. And I think that, in the last, I would say really since COVID, I've really been trying to reorient my brain from thinking purely from just metrics to thinking about how does the integrity of the person and the team behind those metrics, what does that do for the future of this company? And I think
it's critically important because when people get the integrity part wrong and they're not super focused on, the company culture and setting that in the right direction, you could flip the car.
Sure. And there's a million and one ways to financial engineer any metric that you want to create. And unless you're doing forensic accounting and really digging in and diving in and going to talk to their customers and all of those things, then there's a million and one ways to kind of be not 100% forthcoming about how your business is operating. And I would rather bet on sort of the personality of people and say, hey, this is somebody with high integrity and is a trustworthy and honorable person. Even if shit hits the fan, I know this is the guy who will write the in the right way and not take shortcuts to kind of just, get around. As I'm sure, you've invested in enough companies by now. I'm sure you've seen every slice of founder at this point. And there are some people who are, no matter how talented and qualified, there's something about their inherent personality that just prevents them from being successful. And I think that that's the kind of thing that I would like to move myself away from as much as possible.
It really is. I have 3 instances of that in 300 portfolio companies.
Yeah, 1% is still a meaningful
amount. It literally is 1%. And I have 3 instances of such insane, unethical behavior. And I'm just perplexed at how the person could be so gifted in one aspect and so, either criminal or borderline criminal ethical that I have to tell them, do you want to go to jail? I literally had to have a conversation with somebody of this is I can't, I have the top 3 law firms on retainer working with them. I'm I checked with one of the top 3 law firms in the industry. They told me under no circumstances can I be on your board because of what you've done. It's so insane. And they don't want me to have that exposure. Why would you do this? And it was just out of total self-serving greed. So let's go there. Let's go to unbelievable stories, ones that you've experienced or you've been told about and we'll start with founders and then we'll go to VCs. We'll do this in a dueling banjo kind of way. You go first and then I'll go. So tell me, in this crazy, insane, entitled moment, something you've experienced, hopefully, or you've heard about, you know is true, but don't say the name of the company, obviously.
Yeah.
But just broad strokes, what happened?
Yeah.
and why that's so disconcerting to you.
Yeah, I think that obviously that, I think what I have seen is I have seen more and more recently, as opposed to kind of like the last decade or so, these instances where you have partners and people who are best friends, who have worked together for, decades and built things together for decades, all of a sudden now in the last 2 to 3 years have, been at each other's throats. And I don't know what is kind of like the sort of the more macro thing that is happening, but I think that you see this across firms. I think you see this across companies, people who are like insanely close. You could never expect them to be besties. Yeah. Like you have your group of besties, what I'm starting to see is groups of these besties becoming more fractured over things that you would feel like never would have fractured them before. Yeah. And like small Twitter comments or, this guy went and met with a company without the other person knowing, or like these really things that feel almost pedestrian and like we're still in high school, driving these massive rifts in companies and firms and organizations that you thought were like larger than life.
Take me through the example. With protecting the guilty.
Yeah, I think I've worked with a firm that's very well known in Silicon Valley many times across a few investments, and the company that we were working with, a specific company doing a follow-on round, and we asked, will this firm also be participating, because they led the last round. Sure. Follow-on round makes sense that they would, and we found out from the founder that no, there was actually an internal battle between the two GPs of this firm that got so bad that one GP is actually now leaving. And so not only will they not be doing a follow-on, but the person who had done the original investment was actually just leaving now. And so I think that it's become, I think that this thing that we were talking about with this ego, this preoccupation with ego, it's like almost elevating all of the negative aspects of things that you would have seen.
Darker aspects become magnified.
For sure, because
in an up market.
In an up market, and I think the reason is because everybody has a platform now. Whereas 10 years ago, you might just keep that in your, something terrible happened at Facebook, that would most likely stay in your circle, might be shared amongst some text messages, forwarded in an email chain. Now it's like, I'm going to go onto Twitter and write a 25 tweet thread about exactly why this doesn't work. And so I think that you're starting to see this divergence of
crazy
people that you would have never expected to see. And I really think a lot of it is just because, there's this preoccupation with fame and, being at the top of the Midas list and all of these things that are sort of driving away, how people used to work together.
Yeah, it's crazy. This is a trend you might have seen. Founder goes out to raise money. They get a term sheet. Term sheet requires them to double their ownership in the firm, but the new investor doesn't get diluted by that. Mm-hmm. They're selecting this term sheet. Mm-hmm. And you're like, well, that's a conflict of interest. Why don't we have a comp committee board meeting? Mm-hmm. We'll handle your compensation before or after the deal is done, whenever you as the founder want that to be done. Okay, you've been with the company for 6 years, you're fully vested, you want another grant? Great, super reasonable. Let's come up with something. What would we have to pay a new CEO? 5% of the company. Great, we'll give you the 5% over 5 years. Locks you in for another couple of years. No problem with that, right? Makes total sense for everybody to lock in the CEO so they don't leave and start another company. But you've been there for 2 years. You own 45% of the company, and now the new VC wants to own 25% and then give you another 20%, and everybody else has to experience this massive dilution.
Sure.
Oh, and everybody has to give up their pro rata.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Is happening here? And in the same situation, we had a side letter for a board seat. And we all agreed to the board seat over email and everything like that. We own 12% of the company. It's not like a crazy request. Mm-hmm. Turns out the founder didn't co-sign it. We have the agreement, Yep. And then the founder's like, well, I guess you'll have to sue me because we don't have a signed contract.
Right.
I'm like, we were your first investor. We own 12% of your company.
And now you want me to sue you.
And now you want me to sue you. And you want me to get massively diluted. And you've got this new, and I talked to the VC. I was like, how long have you been a venture capitalist? Oh, I just started last month. It was a former lawyer. He's like, I'd love to host you. I'm a big fan. I'd love to host you at my ranch in Napa, some bullshit. I was like, let me tell you something, pal.
Never going to happen.
I am never going to work with you again. I will never send you a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody asks me, like, if any of my founders ask me, I'll tell them exactly what you did.
Sure. As you should.
As I should. Like, your reputation is horrible from day one. And then I just said to the founder, like, listen, I got 350 investments. If you don't want me on your board and you don't want me around, okay, I'm not going to sue you. I don't have time. And if you have somebody who wants to buy out half my shares or all my shares, at some point, let me know. And, I'm not going to go out and market them for sale, but if you are successful, we'll probably sell them on a secondary market if that's okay with you. And we'll just divest and you lost me and that's it. And the founder was like, okay. I was like, wow.
Are you finding that the sort of increase in these crossover funds are leading to more aggressive terms that trickle down from the later stages to the earlier stages?
I am seeing more and more this game of let's pay off the founder. The original payoff was secondary shares, which I don't mind. I don't begrudge a founder from selling 10 or 20% of their stake.
Me neither.
If they can put $1 to $5 million in their bank account, it's not enough for them to retire.
Sure.
If it's pari passu and, other people on the cap table, like other employees, other co-founders get to participate in that, I kind of feel better about it, especially if it's a, company with, a lot of people, key employees who might also want to take advantage of that. So that doesn't feel like you're buying off the founder too much.
Right.
I could see an extreme case where it would, but I don't see that too often being like a payoff. But then I see this, you know what? In order to win this deal, we're going to demand a 10% refresh, 20% refresh to a founder who's already got 50% of the company. And it's like, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And the early investors are the ones who are getting punitively sort of punished for that.
Yeah. And I said to this happened 3 times to me. And all 3 times I just, listen, I got other founders who are doing better and who are ethical. And so I just choose to put my energy into their companies. Like, that's one of the great things about this, when you're on the capital allocator side is like, unless it's your Uber, unless it's your number one investment ever, like you don't have to sweat it. Because in all 3 cases, the companies are failing.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're in failure trying to screw the people who are their earliest supporters. And that to me speaks to this issue you're talking about. In one instance, I had the founder. Anyway, you give me your next one. Crazy founder story, yours or otherwise, or crazy capital allocator story.
Yeah, I guess like one of the things that you've sort of talked about is, it's okay if founders are getting sort of 1 to 5 million because nobody wants like a founder who's so preoccupied with their bills and their maintaining their lives that they can't work for you. Like or not work for you, but work with you. Like that's not what you want. But
you want them to go long.
For sure. And so what I'm also starting to see is and you kind of touched on this, is that in these later stages, there are founders who are getting to take 20, 50 off the table. And at that point, it makes me feel very uncomfortable because I'm like, if you've made $20 to $50 million, that is that is quite a
life-changing.
That's a life-changing amount of money for somebody who most likely 3 years ago had nothing. And so that's all
you're talking about. To be clear here, we're not talking about a 10 to 20-year-old company.
No. We're talking about a sub 5-year-old company,
which is disproportionate. They're taking more money off the table than the company has revenue in that case.
Most likely, yes. In that instance, yes. And these are being built into. It's not even that anybody else has a say. It's being built into the contracts as such that if
take it or leave it.
This term sheet comes with the sort of comes with the clause that you actually have to sell. You actually have to sell us your shares because we're not getting enough allocation via the round. We'll just buy shares off the CEO. We'll pay whatever the market price is, cash them out, and in some instances, I've seen people get close to $50 million via these sort of mechanisms. And to me, that feels very, very frothy, uncomfortable because you're kind of rewarding somebody for a job not yet done. You're kind of saying, "Hey, Michael Jordan, you took us to the second round of the playoffs, but
here's your ring.
Yeah, here's your ring." And so
it's like, not exactly.
There's still a few more games left to play. Yeah,
4th place, 8th best seed, 4th best team. Like, you're not quite there. Yeah. And I think that's an eloquent way to describe it, which is we're starting to give people. I don't mind people getting a little extra credit, but if we're giving people their championship and their Oscar before they've even, edited the film.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, wow, great screenplay. Those, the trailer looks awesome,
incredible
but like,
script. Like,
what a script.
Money.
Yes.
Yeah.
And here's your Oscar. It's like, kind of want to see the film
how
first.
It all plays out. Yeah. And
yeah.
So I think that's really, I think that this kind of idea where we're rewarding people for almost finished work is something that's going to come back and bite us in the ass, because
Absolutely.
in essence, we're valuing 80% of the job. Like, we're saying, you deserve to be rewarded for almost getting to where you told us that you would go. And because you're so close and we can see we can see the kind of A to B of you getting to that actual end place, we'll just call it here and say that you did your job,
I think crypto's got this going on in a crazy way. Listen, I don't want to give anybody a hard time about their investments, but all my friends are in Solana. And I was like, wow, congratulations. This is like the greatest return in the history of venture capital or something. And I had, Sam from Slow on, and I was like, wow, that's great. You returned $2 billion from a $500K investment. Obviously, it's not liquid. Obviously, there's not enough buyers to buy out $49 billion worth of Solana.
Right. But
I'm like, they have 8 developers. And because I had the Solana founder on, and I was like, you have 8 developers, you have $7 billion. It's like, it's $6 billion per developer. We were talking how crazy it was when Facebook was doing acqui-hires at $6 million.
Right.
No, we're at $6 billion. And that to me is super dangerous, because how does the company grow from here?
Sure.
How does an investor put money in and expect any kind of return? I don't know if you saw Fred Wilson's blog post, but he wrote this blog post of like, if you're pre-product, forget about pre-product market fit, pre-product. You haven't built the product and it's at 100 million. How does a fund ever return 20% IRR? It's just not. And he made a model and he said, maybe I don't understand it. Maybe there's going to be 100 or $200 trillion companies, but this doesn't add up.
Yeah, basically you're expecting that, when, 10 years ago, when all of us were so happy that, we had a unicorn in our portfolio, now it's like, unless you have a decacorn, because you invested so late, it doesn't, like, if you're investing at 100 million seed, you need a decacorn for it even to make sense.
Yeah. It's just so great. What's the worst behaviors or just sticks with you story about this moment in time on the VC side or on the founder side?
Yeah, I think one thing that is kind of leaving a bad taste in my mouth is like, we always, as an industry, have spent a lot of money on like, parties and events and offsites and things, but it seems to have reached like an inflection point now where it's like people are just not even being at all specific or seemingly having any sort of like corporate strategy as to why they're doing these things. It just seems kind of like, for the sake of, having our names in people's mouths, we're going to spend $1 million on an Art Basel activation. And when you ask like, okay, well, how does that translate into customers? And how does that sort of, what's the feedback loop between your enterprise SaaS product and this Soho beach house party that you just threw? It's really, really hard to get from A to B. And I think that, like, again, we're in one of those flywheels where it's like, oh, well, X company that just raised 10 billion just did this massive activation, and Y company that just did this. And so it's like, again,
crazy.
Yeah.
This is exactly what happened at the top of the .com market. People started throwing $1 million parties, $500,000 parties, celebrities coming. And you asked yourself, well, is there not a better use of that for customer acquisition?
Right.
Or staff to build the product and delight customers more? And you could look at both of them. If you're throwing $1 million party at Art Basel and you said, well, our current customer acquisition cost is $500K, or $500. Let's say it was a SaaS product, $500, we can get a new customer. Well, you could have 1,000 more customers.
Right.
And then you could have 3 more game-changing developers or sales executives. That sounds like a better deal. So is anybody doing that math? And I literally have a experience in this exact space recently where, first-time CEO wants to throw parties. And I'm like, you want to use, X percent of the money you just raised on a party, on parties over the next year. Can you show me a marketing plan? And, it's just like, I'm the guy at the board meeting, like pumping the brakes. Like, really? Like Jason Galacanis is? I'm usually the most optimistic, crazy guy who's like, let's go. I'm gung ho, but I'm pumping the brakes. Like, I've seen this movie before. This is a sign of founder focus drift, which when you ask me how I make my decisions with that flywheel, nowhere in that flywheel that I described of team, product, customer is Art Basel or some party.
Yeah, like, and when you're spending more than your MRR or even your ARR in some instances on one event, it to me just seems like there is a misalignment between what is supposed to be understood between capital allocators and people who are using that money to build businesses.
And is one of the pernicious things now that if you're the adult in the room and you say pump the brakes, you're not going to get deals, or you think your reputation is going to be as a Debbie Downer?
Yeah, I think that it's like, well, look at that boomer. Like, they don't understand how culture and community is built in this modern day and age. Yeah. Like, you stick to your enterprise SaaS and selling stuff at CES or whatever. Like, I think it kind of like, it almost puts you into this box of like, oh, you don't understand the new sort of way that technology permeates into, public, like, consciousness or culture, right?
Yeah,
and so it's
it's ridiculous. Like, it's the stupidest premise ever. Like, of course we know how it does. Like, yes, people buy commercials. They do influencer activations. Like, we sit here in any number of board meetings or strategy sessions talking about marketing channels. And nowhere in those marketing channels is just spending money like a drunken sailor. Like, it's just not part of this. And if there's no accountability or strategy, no plan, that's what gets truly offensive to me. And I love the way you frame this, and I'm going to reflect it back to you for the audience. The people who are doing this stupid shit, they are the ones with the most modest revenue. If you are at 10 million in ARR, you actually understand the value of 10 million in ARR, and you're not blowing $1 million on anything because you know how that flywheel works, and you know that million could get you to 12 or to 13 because you're efficient. But if you're at 10K a month and 100K a year, you're like, yeah, this $1 million, I raised 10 million and I did it in 30 days. So I'll just raise another 10 million next year with no absolute knowledge of the fact, complete naivete that trees do not grow to the moon and that $10 million might not be there.
Yeah. The quickness of the round turnaround, I think, is also a huge problem in this. And, the fact that people are sending in term sheets a day after they've done their first phone call with the founders.
No diligence, zero diligence term sheets.
Oh, I mean, I'm not sure. Like, yes, you got to think though, like if a product, if you're investing at $100 million pre-money valuation in a pre-product company, the only diligence that you can do is on the team. There's literally nothing else that you can do. And so, like if you, and doing diligence on the team in a lot of instances is like, all right, well, we'll look at their LinkedIn. We'll talk to some of the old places that they work, and we'll just get a general sense from our community of what these people's sort of overall feel, what the community's feeling on these people are, right? And I think that, like, because nobody appreciates the money anymore because the round turnaround time is so quick and people are getting so much money for so little. It's like, oh yeah, like I raised $10 million on 100K. I'll spend $1 million right now because if even in the off chance that I get to 300K, that should be a $30 million round. And so it's just this weird up mental math that everybody's using. But we as investors, and I say we as kind of like raw base, but the investor class is kind of like feeding into this because they're like, you know what? If you want to spend our money on a party, but we still get in the round, like whatever.
I have a funny story for you.
Please.
I don't know if I can tell it here, but my God, it's such a great story.
I mean, maybe a Tusify sort of.
Well, you have your profile picture is of Travis, Shervin, Snoop, and Suge Knight.
One of my favorite pictures of all time. What a group.
I was there. I'm standing to the right of Suge Knight.
Oh, amazing.
Stepped out of the picture.
Smart.
The story of this is I'm out one night with a friend of mine. Won't say the name. And we're at a club. And Snoop Dogg's playing. And Travis was out, and I invited Travis to come sit at our table. And then Shervin is out and about, and he had invested in Uber. He's like, can you get me into the club? I said, sure. He's like, can you put my friend's name on the door? And I'm like, yeah, we got a table. I think it's possible. Who's your friend? He said, Suge. I said, Suge. I said, Suge. I said, Suge Knight? And he says, yeah, Suge Knight. I'm coming with Suge Knight. I'm like, okay. He's like, yeah. Then somebody says to me, like, Snoop Dogg's playing. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, Suge Knight and Snoop Dogg have like this crazy beef for decades. They're going to kill each other. Like they've got death threats. And I don't know if that's true or not, but I guess there was some story of this.
Yes.
And Shervin, like at the time, liked a little bit of attention, I'll say.
I remember those days well, yeah.
And so I go to the door and I say, listen, my friend Shervin's coming. Is it possible to put him on the list? And I know this is crazy. He claims, and I don't know if this is true or not, and I don't know this person, but he claims he's coming with Suge Knight. I don't know if that's a disaster or not. I don't know if my friend is punking me, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that if my friend does come, he could be with Suge Knight. Suge Knight shows up.
Yep.
Shervin proceeds to broker this photo with Suge Knight and Snoop.
Incredible.
And tries to pull me into it. And I immediately, out of self-preservation, say, no fucking way do I want to be in this photo. So I immediately step back with my other friend who's high profile. I said, we're not being in this one because this will wind up in TMC, which is exactly what happened.
My favorite part about that story, and I love Shervin, is that Shervin and Suge Knight are friends somehow, which makes all the sense in the world and none of the sense in the world at the same time.
At that time, Shervin had done the B round of Uber. Bill had done the A, and Prasaka and I had done the C. Shervin was so hyped on this investment, he put the Uber logo in the back of his head.
I remember. I remember that.
And was walking around, and people thought he was the third founder of the company.
I'm sure he loved that.
So people are like, you know the founder of Uber? I was like, which one, Garrett or Travis? And they were like, no, Shervin. I was like, Shervin? Like, he did the third round. There were like 50. I mean, I give him credit for doing it. Like, there were 50 people who wanted to do it, but he got it. So all credit to him. But I was like, yeah, that's an example of something I wouldn't do. I'm not going to put the Uber logo in the side of my head.
We can't expect the Robin Hood fade for you.
No, I mean, I understand. Like maybe a neck tattoo or something. Like
just the
Palm.com.
Yeah, exactly. There we go.
OG. But yeah, that was a pretty funny photo. And
I'm just happy it still exists on the internet.
I was 50% responsible for it. I'm 20% responsible for it. And Shervin's 80% responsible for the Suge Knight photo. And thank the Lord I'm not in that photo. Literally, I have a lifetime of stepping out of the photo.
Yeah, that's a talent that not a lot of people appreciate, and it should be appreciated more.
Like, what's the upside here? People know I'm
somewhat tangentially related.
Somehow, friend of a friend in some other orbit. Like, no, it's a hard no from me. Well, listen, this has been great.
Yeah,
I hope someday we meet. Was this a goof that you're raising a Praying for Exits fund?
No, it's been fully raised, all committed. I'm going to start investing it at the top of the year.
Okay. Does that mean you're leaving the fund you're at?
Nope.
Does the fund you're... All right, here's the question. Does the fund you're at know you're doing Praying for Exits?
No.
Oh, my Lord.
Yeah.
They don't know, which means they subsequently don't know about this shadow fund.
Correct. But what they don't know, and they will probably appreciate, is this shadow fund will serve as a scalp fund for a much larger fund, basically.
Got it. How big was the fund? And is it like a rolling fund or something?
Yeah, it's going to be, we have 5 committed, and it was like 5 with a cap of 10, and I just wanted 5 to start. So
you can make little 100K, 250K bets. And suffice it to say your fund is bigger, or the fund you work at is bigger. If you do in fact work for a fund and this isn't all a punk, disclaimer. I have no idea who you are. Literally have no idea.
Happy to find some ways to prove to you that I do have a fund, but...
at the very least, this has been a great conversation. And you're obviously well versed in all of this. So either you're a quick study and this is a complete fake, or you're in it and it's completely credible. I don't care either way. It was an entertaining conversation. It's delightful to watch you operate the handle. I think it's funny. The Elizabeth Holmes stuff was a little crazy. What do you think? Guilty? Will she be found guilty next week or no?
You know what? I think that...
Or percentage odds she's innocent.
So, yeah, I think that my personal opinion is that she is going to be found guilty, but that her lawyers are going to reduce what's coming to her by some very significant amount. But I think that the more important part is that she will always be considered guilty by the court of public opinion. And so hopefully, there's nobody silly enough to continue to fund. I know she has some other ambitions in the venture space.
Oh, really? She wants to be a VC?
No. She doesn't want to be a VC. I think she wants to raise money. Company.
Oh my Lord! Can you imagine?
Listen, I don't want to be, I don't want to say anything about anything, but I would be very unsupportive of the people that made that idea into reality. And
I would be like investing in the Fire Festival guy.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I heard Adam Newman is going around picking up checks, so there's a bunch.
Well, that makes sense to me because I could see people looking at Adam Newman and saying he got ahead of his skis, but the company did make it public. It did build an incredible brand. He learned something. He'll be on his best behavior. Like, people will rationalize stuff in our industry to say, the guy from Zenefits.
I remember, yeah.
He got a sanction from the SEC, and now he's built one of the great unicorns. So, was that did the SEC get it wrong? I don't know. I guess they can get some things wrong. So, but people, if they think there's an opportunity there, will suspend disbelief. And he's obviously a great entrepreneur in terms of building product. I mean, he's transcended in that ability. So, people will roll the dice, I think, is the right way to say it. My thinking on Elizabeth Holmes right now is, I think there's a 20% chance she gets off. You never know. But I was shocked to find, because I just did a podcast about Elizabeth Holmes, The Dropout. I just did The Dropout. There's like 20 of these podcasts about her, but The Dropout is like the best one, or amongst the best ones. And so I did the Dropout podcast, and I was like, listen, they didn't call, the prosecutor didn't call any of the VCs who didn't invest. Like, no. Right. I'm like, are you sure about that? And they're like, absolutely. I was like, I hate to tell you this, but I would have gotten her convicted in like 3 days. It would have been an open shut case. You put the 20 firms that she met with on the stand and say, why didn't you invest? And they say, she wouldn't show me the technology. She wouldn't let me do diligence. Has that ever happened before, that somebody wouldn't let you do diligence? No. Okay. Next person. What happened? She wouldn't let us look at the machine. She said it was proprietary tech. Have you looked at proprietary tech before, sir? Yeah, all the time. Do you then release that proprietary tech and give it to other companies? Of course not. That'd be the end of my career, and we would get sued. So when she told you she wouldn't show it to you, what did you think? Well, that she obviously didn't have the technology and she's a fraud. Okay. And imagine you do that 20 times.
Right. There's no jury in the world that would...
There's no jury in the world that doesn't go guilty.
Yeah.
The prosecutor didn't call one witness who turned them down. That's the equivalent of like, this person's a serial killer, and there's 5 people who went to dinner with the serial killer and got bad vibes and left, the date, and didn't go back and get eaten
and that's not
and murdered.
Not relevant information.
And you're like, yeah, we don't need to call those people. It's like, why did you run from the date with Jeffrey Dahmer? It's like, because I thought he was going to kill me. This guy was acting very strange. He was saying weird stuff. It's like, it's deranged. But, this other thing where the press thinks that Theranos was a Silicon Valley company is crazy. They're like, Silicon Valley enabled this.
Silicon Valley. I mean, there wasn't one prominent Silicon Valley investor in it. So it does seem a bit odd.
So bonkers.
But I think that your perspective on it is probably true. And I think that if there is any justice in the world, and hopefully for our sake as capital allocators, there will be a sort of line in the sand that's drawn about like, you know what, like everybody in this industry tries to paint their numbers and paint what they're doing in the most rosy picture, but there is a cap on what you can do. And I think that if she were to get off, it would kind of reinforce the idea of like, you know what, fudge the numbers, keep it pushing, just like continue to fake it until you make it, and then hopefully we'll all be rich. I think that that's like a very toxic way to position things.
I think that's well said as well. Like I train young entrepreneurs, and eventually, in my launch accelerator, somebody will have a slide that says our customers. And I look at it, I'm like, whoa, that's incredible. And I'm like, tell me, how much do they each pay? And they're like, $0. I'm like, it says customers. They said, oh yeah, they're on free trials. I'm like, that's not customers. I was like, I know you don't think that this is important.
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah, these 4 are in our pipeline. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
One slide for pipeline targets. These are people we want to sell to. If you can help us get in touch with them, that'd be great. One slide that says free trials and then puts how many users are on it and, some drill down metrics if they're actually using it. And then one that says paid clients and how much they're paying.
Mm-hmm.
And like literally, I had somebody who had 3,000 customers and their product was like $99 a month. And so their deck never mentioned that they had $4,000 in revenue. I'm like, wait a second, what's going on here? You should have 3,000, what was it? 3,000 customers, $100 a month. You should have 300,000. You have 3.6 million. Why are you even applying to the accelerator? They're like, well, we only have like 100 people on trials or 1,000 people on trials. So it's like, well, still 1,000 people, $300 a month, we only have 100 people at $300. So that should be 30, not 10 or 4,000. They're like, oh yeah. No, our original pricing was $5 a month. And I'm like, oh my Lord.
Yeah.
Like you literally don't know you're committing securities fraud in the eyes of the SEC.
Sure.
Like,
and there needs to be something that people can look to. Like, if I do this, this is what happens to me. And I don't think that that exists. I don't think that there has been this one thing where it's like, oh, this person flew a little bit too close to the sun and their wings fell off. Like,
we just had one. There was an app company in the peninsula here that just straight up lied about their MRR, and they got busted. And it was because some investor like was told X, and the tax return said Y or whatever, and they were like, okay, wait a second. When I invested, you said you had 80 million in ARR, and you have 40. It was some like app, metrics company, and the founder just straight up lied about their ARR, and he's going to go to jail and never be able to run a company. All right, listen, we talked for over an hour. Great guest. Everybody follow Praying for Exits on Instagram. It's hilarious. It's well worth following, and it was a pleasure having you on the pod. Hope we'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, I would love to do this again. Thank you, man.
All right.
Appreciate
I can't wait to hear how your voice. I got to hear your actual voice, but we are going to mask it in a modulator. We worked hard on the modulator to make sure.
Your producer did a great job, so awesome. I really appreciate it.
Well, we will guarantee that we will not out you because we don't know who you are, and hopefully you don't get out.
I appreciate
continued
that.
Success, and we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups. Bye bye.